Welcome to our fifth installment of this Humaculture Perspective series on optimal behavior. This topic is one of my favorites, the social context, which I suppose shouldn't be too surprising because the Virtuosa team superpower assessment indicated my superpower is to overcome barriers in the social context. In our other webinars so far, we've covered three of the four contexts, the spaces, self, and systems contexts. And Colin and Hanley are special guests for this webinar series. And Colin is a founder and director of Virtuosa team. To help us illustrate the power of the social context, we thought it would be great to share about someone who has particularly influenced our lives. Colin, can you get us started by telling us about a person who you believe has made a big difference in your life?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. I'd say it's probably the first chief actuary that I ever worked with in a consulting setting. He was a brilliant gentleman by the name of Chris Carr. Until that point in my career, I'd only really worked with what I'd describe as the typical actuary back then, something very straight, serious, quite emotionally detached. Chris was none of those things. He showed me that you could be a consummate professional without losing any of the fun element of your personality. I noticed you were quick to jump right in there and ask me about an influential person. Would you like to tell us who's been a big influence in your life, Steve?
Sure, Colin. Thanks for asking. I would have to say my wife, Jocelyn. She has had a profound impact on every aspect of my life, from engagement in my faith, the way I dress, what I eat, the activities in which I participate, and also keeping me from over engaging in my work, my golf, eating, drinking, etc.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Steve. That's great. Let me introduce Hanley and ask her the same question. Hanley's a founding director of Virtuosa team as well. And Hanley, who's made a special impact in your life?
Well, that'll be Bishop Desmond Tutu. He was a remarkable figure who dedicated his life to fighting injustice and promoting peace, reconciliation, and human dignity. He was a courageous voice against apartheid in South Africa, which is where I'm from, for which he was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 1984. But back to you, Wes. Can you tell us about someone in your life who's had a big impact?
Sure, I'd love to. Well, my grandfather was born in 1908 on a large ranch near Waco, Texas, and he lived through the Great Depression. He never finished high school, but I tell you, he could work the New York Times crossword puzzle faster than anybody I've ever known. He taught me that real learning doesn't come from fancy degrees and formal education, although he was absolutely all for that, but from a natural desire and curiosity to improve yourself and be a keen observer of the world around you.
Wow, these are great stories that illustrate the power of influence in the social context. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A rather than the chat so we are better able to see them. We know your time is valuable, so let's dig in.
All right, so let's start thinking about behavior change, and especially today's topic, which is the social context, and within the framework of the 7 dimensions of humaculture. Wes, what are your thoughts on how the social context fits in the humaculture framework?
Well, did anyone notice the illustration on the cover slide? And if you didn't, that's not a problem. We're going to be talking about it over the next couple of slides. But it's a photo from a pine forest in the southeast U.S., and I've seen this happen over and over. A pine forest is developed for building housing or shopping centers, or it could be, hardwood forest as well. And some of the original trees from that dense forest are going to be left standing because, any kind of tree is better than none, right? Well, but the density of the forest, the trees were supporting each other and could stand against the stress of storms. But alone, any remaining tree might not be strong enough to stand the onslaught of a gale force wind. It really needed its social network to continue to thrive and survive.
That's an amazing illustration. It reminds me of the things we've said in the past about the intangible asset dimension and the garden arrangement analogy.
Yeah, exactly. And later in the webinar, we're going to be talking a lot about the ways to naturally create conditions that promote positive social interaction. And successful gardeners do this all the time. Remember, one of our previous examples is the 3 sisters. And that is a really great example of an intentional effort to create conditions that allow positive social interaction between those plants. And the 7 dimensions provide a better way of understanding organizations and making decisions about organizations. And really great organizational leaders whether knowingly or not, take a 7-dimensional approach. So today we're going to be talking again with our colleagues at Virtuosa Team about the social context, and it's so important because people are social creatures, and yeah, some more than others, but that's an indispensable part of the organization's success that is often ignored.
So let's spend a couple of minutes discussing why the social context is so important.
Okay, well, Steve, people, I think, are the reasons we create organizations, and yet many organizational leaders fail to understand the social context involves so much more than merely, quote, helping people get along or having fun together. You know, the trees, again, in the cover illustration and the little snippet of the illustration in this slide here, you know, weren't merely having a great time together. Their natural proximity allowed the forest to thrive, even through adverse events like a hurricane, for example.
So today we're going to consider how organizations often miss the real influence of social context and how ineffective organizations fail to appreciate and leverage the power of social connection. In fact, existing social networks often work against them in what they're trying to achieve. Consequently, they fail to leverage the power of connection and don't set up opportunities for natural engagement. Finally, they miss the point that human beings forget things quickly and move on to the next shiny object.
So then in the second part of the webinar, we'll flick to the positive and we'll take a look at a few examples of how firms that really do understand the social context get it right. Principally, they're the ones found leveraging the power of social contagion, using what we call change agents to energize the change. They create opportunity for people to rub shoulders and get together, even face-to-face or virtual interactions as well. And they can be found overtly recognizing the people who actually get it right. They use the power of commitment to each other to amplify the willpower that's necessary to see change through and to make it stick.
So with all that said, let's explore what happens when organizations don't use a social context effectively. Colin, do you want to start us off?
Happy to, Steve. So businesses that fail to understand social contagion are the businesses that rely on facts, on logic, and individual willpower to get the job done. They're the businesses with leaders who are found asking, and in the worst cases, telling people what to do. But then those leaders exhibit actions which are inconsistent with the request that they're making. My parents used to embody this for me when they had their favorite saying that they'd unload onto me, which is, do as I say, not as I do.
Well, something I grew up hearing as well, Colin. It's not limited to your side of the pond. In the illustration here we have in more detail, you can really see the spindly looking trees that are left after clearing and removing the trees that provided the adequate protection for the surrounding trees. And this is exactly the situation we often see in the workplace. If you don't support the change request to behave in some optimal way with support for the employees, as soon as a strong wind of resistance to change blows in, whatever effort you're making is likely to just fall over and fail, just as these trees did.
Yeah, that's right, Wes. We are powerfully influenced by those around us. And if we don't reflect on that, when we're making these attempts to encourage optimal behavior, those attempts will likely fail. Some might refer to this as peer pressure or inertia, but the way things are done acts as a serious anchor point for employees. To move from the current way of being needs several things. But if an employee doesn't see other employees like them engaging in a new behavior, they might lack the confidence to engage.
Yes, I've worked with several organizations that fail to understand social contagion and the role of champions. For example, many organizations struggle with well-being because they roll it out their wellness programs, hoping that it will catch on with the right people. Often organizations ask for volunteers to serve as champions, but they don't fully understand the power of networks or network nodes and their influence on how information and ideas flow so the volunteers may not be the most influential people. The same principles apply to rolling out new business initiatives. The real champions or people that influence others wind up modeling the wrong behaviors, completely undermining what the initiative is trying to achieve.
Yeah, if I can give an example along those lines, we worked with an organization that was struggling to adapt to significant changes in its operating environment because, frankly, the leaders were struggling to accept the implications of those changes. And They're also trying to grow their own power bases or domains. So it was getting a little political. The behavior that was being modeled was protectionist and siloed in thinking. And I'm sure you've all come across it in various circumstances, meaning the employees on the ground didn't get the big picture. The messages from senior leadership were being totally undermined by the actions of middle management.
Now, we humans are naturally social creatures. We've evolved to the top of the food chain through our abilities to learn from each other effectively. For organizations to thrive and perform in what is a rapidly changing world, they need the innovation and creativity that comes from people connecting. It's doubly important now in the world of home and hybrid working. Actions to create connection, particularly accidental connections, need to be much more deliberate. Many organizations are still struggling to move into the post-COVID world because it is so virtual and consequently are struggling to innovate.
Henley, your thoughts make me think of how organizations have many structures that separate people. They are physical ones, but we also see there's virtual ones as well. So these occur when teams become siloed or cliquey. And now in a virtual business environment, it's just time and space. Office space is a good example. Many organizations followed the trends of the big tech companies and eliminated barriers without necessarily recognizing the implications for their culture and needs of their business. When organizations look at what their peers are doing, rather than what makes the most sense for their organization, what's most effective for their organizations, other problems seem to emerge. We see this in the pendulum over time, moving from open spaces to offices and back to open spaces.
Yeah, that's all great. And I'd highlight another problem, which is one of clarifying expectations when the connections do occur, particularly in the virtual space. If guidance is fuzzy or incomplete, the innovative energy that comes from these chance meetings might end up pulling the organization in the wrong direction, or in the worst case, be totally wasted. That can lead to demotivation, particularly if high energy innovation is stalled or rejected, and protagonists find that the idea just isn't needed or isn't helpful to the organization.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think we also need to consider the rewards dimension. If the reward strategy promotes the success of the individual rather than the success of the organization, individuals, and I think particularly the team leaders, are going to become naturally protective of their team's resources and be less inclined to share those resources for the benefit of the business overall.
Yeah, we worked with an insurance company to help them stand up a new business unit. They had a transformative vision that would be market revolutionary. However, the vision and expectations of the group driving the project had not been widely socialized. The work groups did not understand what the business was trying to achieve, so they had a lot of questions about key operational aspects. The lack of communication between the work groups and the failure of leadership to provide answers inhibited the business from moving forward.
Okay, so one of the big barriers to success that we've identified in our client interactions is the failure to follow through in a new way of behaving. In almost all change scenarios, there's a big fanfare at the launch and there's high energy, everybody's excited. If you go back in 6 months' time, senior levels probably moved on to the next initiative. And because there's then no further extrinsic motivation, if the behavior hasn't caught hold and become habitual with people on the ground, they're going to revert back to the old ways of doing things, the way they did things before. This often happens because the organization fails to support and adequately recognize those that are trying to make the change. Worse still, they can all inadvertently reward the wrong role models or the wrong corporate hero archetypes, as we call them.
It's really interesting, Collins. It horticulturally feels like a garden that has a great plan, but no follow through on execution, which leads you to just nothing more than an overgrown and out of control mess. By the way, did anybody notice the sign on the wall of there you go, Steve, of the slide here? Well, clearly, the fellow in the foreground is not modeling the new behavior. Hanley, can you tell us about this idea of the corporate archetype and how organizations get this wrong?
Sure. The corporate hero archetype is how successful employees at an organization are described. It's the type of person who gets promoted or who tends to be seen hanging out around the C-suite offices. Quite often, when a change happens, the corporate hero archetype is not evolved into the newly stated way of work. For example, when successful employees and their senior leaders fail to model the desired well-being behavior, the people who get promoted are those but the people who are getting promoted are those who are working 12 to 14 hours a day and are in this always on mode. So it doesn't matter what the well-being goals are. That's the image in the mind of employees and the one that they will try and emulate.
Yeah, I've seen too many organizations communicate goals, objectives, standards of behavior, etc., but then have no measurement or accountability for the new behavior. As a result, it's really hard for employees to stay on track. There are too many other barriers or temptations that take them off of what's most important. We worked with a Fortune 500 company that wanted to develop a financial well-being strategy that integrated into its well-being initiatives and built in more financial fiscal responsibility throughout the organization. They already had significant investments in financial well-being resources, but nobody knew about them. Nobody influential or successful was engaged. And they also just didn't make the resources obvious. And there was no expectation or incentive for anyone to change any existing behaviors.
Right. So as we've shared in our previous webinars, we believe that the key to driving optimal behavior is to understand the influences that act on people as experienced through the four powers and the four contexts in which those forces operate. The contexts in which this occurs are largely invisible and unnoticed, yet they're extremely powerful. Mm. We use the example of a fish to help us remember that water wholly defines a fish's life, but they swim around in it blissfully unaware of the context that gives them that life. As an example of the social context, this goldfish is lacking any kind of interaction with other goldfish, so it can't mimic behavior that would maybe help it find food more effectively or avoid dangers that might be impacting the goldfish negatively.
And as I've said also in previous webinars, the key is to intentionally create the conditions for change to happen more naturally and consistently. So in this analogy, if you want the fish to live longer, be more healthy, introducing long living and healthy goldfish around it is likely to have a beneficial effect. Although we know that some of the longevity and health status comes from genetic factors, the influence of behavior is palpable and will result in beneficial health and longevity outcomes for the goldfish.
Okay, great. So we've really kind of considered some problem areas. So Hanley, now in light of these things, can you tell us a little bit more about how organizations that understand the social context better can more effectively promote desired behaviors?
Of course. When we think about the formula for change, and that's something that we're going to be sharing again with you in the next webinar, the first power is helping people grow capability. For this to happen, it's critical to get the social context right. As we've highlighted earlier, we've evolved by being very good at copying what others do, particularly people who are like us. Not only do people learn from seeing others perform in specific behaviors, they also gain confidence from knowing that others like them can have success from practicing.
Organizations that are successful and change resilient are the ones found deploying change agents and champions when a new way of behaving is required. So these champions have two roles fundamentally. The first is they actively and visibly engage in the new behavior in a way that creates confidence in the people around them. Secondly, they are energizing and promoting the change, recruiting others to engage in showing them that it's a good thing to do. Almost literally, they're the ones that are shouting, hey, look at me, I'm engaging in this new behavior, and I'm being successful doing it. Why not come join me? I'll show you how.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, Colin. I love this illustration for that very reason. This clearly the lady in the orange top there is the leader, and all these others are watching carefully and learning from her, and looks like they're very excitedly doing so. They want to do this.
I agree, Colin and Wes. It's not only important to have champions, but the right champions in order to develop social contagion. When you get the right people to champion the initiative, the centers of influence, The initiative program will spread. We have employed this strategy in both wellness initiatives as well as broader business initiatives, such as rolling out a new performance management system. We not only involve the change agents in the rollout, but also in the design of the new initiatives so that they become the owners of it and its success.
Right. And we worked with an organization where we recruited and trained 60 of 300 employees. All of those 60 were below the executive teams, and we trained them to be leaders of change in order to succeed. These employees were trained on how change happens, as well as the behaviors necessary to perform at a level for success under these changing conditions. They were immensely successful for facilitating the evolution of the organization with passion and enthusiasm, creating cross-team connections and breaking down those silos.
Organizations successful in the world of hybrid working know how to get people to connect, even though they may not meet each other face-to-face regularly. It's important that this connection extends beyond the physical and verbal into the emotional side. The effect is therefore something that needs to be quite deliberate. It can't just occur because you're having a chat on Zoom. In the past, we've talked about the benefits of shared spaces like coffee rooms and canteens, what we Brits over here call their workplace cafeterias. But in the social context, it's more likely to be structured interactions or software that's designed to connect people.
Right, as an example, during and after COVID, I worked with a small team in the remote mountains of Arizona who were connected to a network of thousands of online volunteers. At the time, they were all doing their own thing, and there was so much duplication, confusion, miscommunication, and conflict as a result. After getting everyone together and aligning again around our purpose, connecting to that purpose, as well as the expectations of them to behave more like a team, we all made formal commitments linked to the organizational values to embed that. When we then agreed to have daily check-in meetings, which were fun and mandatory, and gave each member the opportunity to lead one of those meetings. Very soon after that, we established a natural cadence connecting, and in this way, a lot of those ways of working were then transferred to their work with the online volunteers. Soon after that, it was unusual to find a team member who didn't know what every other team member was up to for that particular week. So the impact of that was speed, efficiency, and more time to have fun together.
Yeah, that's great. In the case of the insurance company standing up a new business unit, we started to work with the named leader to clarify the vision for the new unit and what must happen operationally in order to achieve the vision. Meetings were scheduled with each of the work groups and other individuals that would be impacted to understand their various questions that needed to be addressed in order to operationalize it. As these questions are raised, it necessitates leadership that can make the necessary decisions to ensure operational success.
Right. For change to stick in the long term, it's important that as many people as possible engage early on. And the early adopters are then visibly rewarded and celebrated for their efforts. There are two big things to think of here. Firstly, in your teams, make sure that the people who engage in the new behavior are given recognition and appreciation. It doesn't have to be a financial reward. A virtual pat on the back that is visible to all other colleagues is often good enough to drive intrinsic motivation. The second element is to share willpower amongst the team by pairing them up and creating accountability partnerships.
Okay, well, accountability seems like a crucial element in any change process, or really any process. And but you bring it up here, obviously, in the context of accountability partnerships. So, Colin, perhaps you could explain a little bit more about what accountability partnerships are.
Yeah, no problems, Wes. Accountability partners usually occur in twos or threes, where individuals make commitments to each other that they're going to do something specifically different. So they're trying to make a change, they're going to do something different. And those things, the request will have a hallmark of a SMART goal, so specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. And they will request that their accountability partner checks in on them on a regular basis, typically weekly, to see how they're doing. They might also give some guidance on what to say or what to do if they're not actually doing what they're trying to set out to achieve, so that the accountability partner can be helpful in guiding them to do the right thing. The existence of that third party to whom you are responsible for the change amplifies the willpower and creates a powerful ally on the road to change.
I've also come to realize that if there isn't accountability for the new behavior, it can be hard for employees to stay on track. Some level of accountability needs to be imbued in the reward structure as well. In the financial wellness example discussed earlier, we worked with the organization to determine how best to weave that what they already have into its already successful well-being initiatives and incorporate a level of expectation and accountability to engage. This also helps capture the attention of the true champions discussed earlier, who tend to be focused on the areas where they will be held accountable.
Okay, well, I think this has been a really fruitful and helpful discussion. And I'm certainly much clearer on the powerful role of the social influence here of behavior change. People just simply can't do it without the help of others. So Steve, can you sum up for us?
Sure, Wes. We all know there are many behaviors we should probably work to change and would probably like to. Today, we focus on the social context, and it's obvious to me that there is a lot we can do to improve our health, performance, productivity, and more by making sure that we surround ourselves with the right friends and colleagues, individuals who will support us on the change journey rather than challenge us. The methods set out by Hanley and Collin to make use of the power of connection and social contagion seems crucial to achieving optimal behavior. I can certainly see how the methods they've outlined could be powerful in driving change.
Okay, well, we've got just one more session to go in this series, and that final session will be Thursday, July the 18th. And we will bring it all together there and show you how to reap the fruits of this idea of optimal behaviors through all that we've discussed over the first 5 sessions. You can also access replays of this and our prior sessions at our website at humaculture.com. So I think we're ready for some questions now.
Looks
Steve,
like we've got a few minutes, so why don't we take some? The first one, how do social contexts and relationships outside the work influence the organization? Hanley, do you want to take that?
Sure. I think because all relationships affect and influence the individual, particularly those people who are closest to them or to us, like family and friends, every individual can also then influence the workplace, and the influence of parties external to the business is a little bit more widespread than one might assume. This is particularly true of well-being type behaviors, which often take place outside of the workplace. Also, we bring our personal experiences with family and friends into the workplace. And so those are going to go well or poorly and can influence our work accordingly.
Yeah, so even when it comes to work performance, it's important to recognize that there are various issues that arise in people's personal life that will impact their performance at work. There are resources available to support employees and minimize impact, and organizations need to be more strategic about that. I think we could take one more. In a virtual setting, what are some ways to create the random social interactions Hanley mentioned? Collin, do you want to take that?
I'll do it quick as I can. I think it's very, very difficult to have accidental connections in the virtual space. So as I think I alluded to in some of the things I was saying, you need to be somewhat deliberate about the way in which you're causing people to come together. Trying to recreate situations where accidental random social connections occur in the workplace and people just come together, discuss things that they wouldn't normally discuss. What instead you have to do is set up an environment where people can come together and make it clear. Again, I was trying to make this point that when they're together, the purpose is just to share what's going on for them at any point in time, and the opportunity to then find out what's happening in other parts of the business that in a virtual world you just get completely siloed and cut off from. That might create the spark that leads to something that changes, that creates innovation, that drives the business forward. So as long as people know why they're there, as long as those interactions are structured in the way that they come together, they make the connection, and they know it's for innovation and exploration, then they're usually constructive.
Well, I think that does it for our time. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you find this helpful. We would love to hear from you, to learn more from you about what your specific challenges and circumstances are. Please remember to register for our last session in this series and complete the survey you will receive following the session. We value your feedback. And if you have ideas for what other topics you'd like to address in future webinar series or webinars, please let us know that as well. Thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.